Let me just remember to record here. I am really thrilled to welcome Lucy Cahill as our second presenter for our faculty and staff show and tell series for the 2025-26 academic year. So Lucy, thank you so much for being here and sharing about yourself and your work. Just some housekeeping before I introduce Lucy, to please keep yourself muted. This presentation will be recorded, so if you prefer to not be on that recording, please turn your video off. The presentation will be shared later today, as well as updated or uploaded to our YouTube channel. Lucy Cahill, she, her, is an arts administrator and artist, originally from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and now based in Southwest Detroit. Her freelance illustration career took off in the mid-2010s upon her arrival to Detroit, and she has created upwards of 70 illustrated concert posters between 2014 and 2025, both for local bands and nationally based acts. The themes Cahill explores in her work include the undefined feminine, a sense of longing for nostalgia, both real and imagined, food and nature, and references to mid-century print media. Alongside her freelance illustration work, she also currently works as the gallery coordinator at the College for Creative Studies. Lucy, thank you so much for being here, and I will let you take things away when you're ready.
Thanks so much, Laura, for that lovely introduction. And thanks so much to the Academic Affairs Department for the invite today. It's a real pleasure to be able to share my work and my artistic journey with you all. So I really appreciate that. So we'll just get things started. The name of my talk is Mark Making, Weird Poetics and Manufactured Nostalgia. These are themes that really guide my work and have since I was a young artist. So we'll start from the very beginning. This is a photo of me taken by my father when I was about 6 years old at my grandparents' house in Dallas, Texas. And I really want to start with a story of myself, as a young artist, and my journey of feeling slightly an outsider, slightly an observer or a dreamer, an embracer of the weird and the slightly uncomfortable. I've always been someone who's interested in imperfect art, the radical, the weird, subverted feminine, and fascinated by art and visual culture that feels just a little bit off and leaves me, the observer, wanting more. So I'm very much someone who is driven by outside inspiration. And I had inspirations even from a young age. I've always been somebody who draws, and with my sister and with encouragement from my parents. And my inspirations from an early age focused, and they have throughout the years, focused on lowbrow culture. So growing up, my family and I in Grand Rapids, Michigan, lived around the corner from a used bookstore. And against my parents' wishes, my sister and I would walk up there and come back with piles of Archie comics, both used and new. I also was, so with Archie comics, it reinforced this idea of like mid-century Americana idealism. They also had some pretty problematic heteronormative tropes that they reinforced, but I kept coming back to the bright colors, the thick line work, the feel of the paper, the halftone layered printing, and the smell of the old bookstore that lingered on the paper. I would even take tracing paper to the comics and trace Betty and Veronica, the main female characters, and create my own outfits for them on tracing paper. My dad also had old episodes of Pee-wee's Playhouse that he had recorded and would play in the house sometimes. And those were a real point of fascination for me. Even as a kid, I sensed that there was a little bit of darkness lying behind the colorful surface of this, what was meant to be a kids' TV show. I really sort of identified with Pee-wee's character, who embraced kind of being a freak and fun-loving and marching to the beat of his own drum. I was really drawn in by the puppetry and the bright colors and just sort of the folk art style of the TV show. And again, this is me sort of like beginning my journey in being interested in lowbrow culture and how that could affect me even as a kid, and going forward into my art career from there. Uh, so my whole family was really supportive of my sisters and my like hunger for art, both consuming and creating it. My dad is a photographer, and he had built a dark room in our basement in our house in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I would go down there and stay down in the dark room while he worked on his photographs, kind of let the tangy smell of the developer cling around me, and just, the smell of the chemicals, the red light. I would bring down my American Girl doll catalogs, my Nancy Drew books, and just sort of chill down there and see what I saw as pure magic happening, not knowing how the process worked, but seeing how my dad would make something come out of what felt like nothing in the chemical baths, and his devotion to self-expression and sort of figuring out who he was as an artist in person and showcasing that through these photo montages and these strange compositions, that really added to my own inspiration and helped shape what I wanted to explore in my own art later on. So we'll jump ahead quite a bit to the early 2010s. In between, childhood and my mid 20s, I was drawing quite a bit. I was um, taking like a few classes at Kendall College or at my high school, but nothing like super formal. However, I was just continuing to draw and develop my technique on my own. And uh, just after graduating college from U of M, which I went for art history actually. I did not go to an art and design school. I was living in a house in Ann Arbor, filled with illustrators, tattoo artists, musicians, fellow creatives. And that experience in my mid early 20s, was where I learned firsthand the value of cultivating a creative community. We would all work at the People's Food Co-op, and we would meet up on the porch after our shifts, drawing in sketchbooks, shoulder to shoulder next to each other, making mixtapes on the boombox, and really having organic crit sessions that came out of, offering feedback for one another's work. This also led to collaborations amongst us, and it was a really valuable pivot point for me. And this is a piece I worked on at that time. So you can see I'm really interested in like busy compositions, cartoons, Americana like signifiers and logos, but twisting everything to make it just a little dark and just a little strange. So like I said, I had just graduated from U of M in art history, but I also had taken 4 tutorials with Ken Michalowski, the poet, and one half of the Alternative Press, which was a small publishing press for poetry in Detroit in the 70s and 80s. And I really learned from him, well, a few things that I've carried with me into my artistic life. And one was the idea of marrying text and art together. So I was really interested. I was writing my own poetry at the time, but also interested in how writing affected what you were seeing on the page visually. So thinking about how to break up words on the page, how different lettering styles might influence how the viewer reads the mood of the piece. And so at this time, I was really, yeah, inspired by Ken, inspired by the underground comics artist Phoebe Gluckner, who I got to be a studio assistant to during some of my days in Ann Arbor. Also, you'll see the influence from like pulp novel covers, and again, like B-movie covers, underground comics. And I was just really consuming a lot of material culture at that time, just sort of like synthesizing it in my brain and seeing what I would interpret from taking in that inspiration. And I mention all these influences because the way I work, like I was saying, is very much about responding to inspiration as sort of a love letter to the craft that touches me. So that may be poetry, but it's also film and it's also comic books and graphic novels and music. And I'll talk more about that throughout the talk and how I am someone who's very connected to outside influence. Um, so this piece was made probably about 2014. And, part of the reason I named my talk about this idea of mark making, that's sort of my concept of record keeping as an artist, as somebody who draws. I really try to explore a changing sense of self through drawing and using my sketchbook as sort of a journal that feels more acceptable to share with the outside world. Mark making, drawing, linoleum block printing, it feels like the same thing to me as carving my initials into stone or into a tree for future generations to see. So it's really about leaving proof of existence too, proof of my strange ideas. And if they resonate with someone now or in the future, I think that's great. Um, Throughout when I was developing my style in the mid 2010s forward, I really had this preoccupation with defining femininity in my own terms, crafting my own concept of girlhood and what I would later call the weird girl. I liked drawing women in a way that makes the viewer either uncomfortable, slightly off, slightly like an unhinged feeling, but also for women, I wanted to make work that felt empowering. So, with the figure on the left, she's got a blank expression, but she's got this like sort of like Americana 1950s, grin on her. She's got acne, she's got vampire fangs, she's got a mask. Like there's all these unexplained, sort of like strange details to her that in a way it was like an expression of myself too at the time. On the figure on the right, which was an illustration for a local band in the mid 2010s. I also sort of always tried to give my figures sort of an unhinged, strange expression. So again, here, this is more of me figuring out what I wanted to do with the idea of femininity and the feminine, and how could I harness these signifiers of femininity and make it feel uncomfortable and weird and powerful and playful. I think by, recording these little snippets in gouache on original source material helped me just sort of create my own sense of self and experimentation and play. So we'll move on to what I call my poster era. So I moved to Detroit in 2015, and I've been in the city for 10 years now. At the time, the reason I moved was I was just really interested in a larger community of creative people and ready to find a new home or new space. Um, and when I moved to Detroit, I was really starting with a clean slate. I didn't know anybody in town, but music was really important to me. And I went to a lot of shows all the time, even back in the Ann Arbor days. And this sort of origin story of my period in Detroit really starts with sketching at rock and roll bars around town, bringing my sketchbook, meeting people at shows, and just sketching them, sketching the environment around me, and sort of making connections through that. And at this point in time, about 2015, 2016, an old friend and contact of mine, Lauren Rossi, a musician, commissioned me to make a poster, which is the one on the left, for a show with Lalu's Today's Hits and Casual Sweetheart at what was then called UFO Factory. And it got me noticed by a local promoter, Virginia Benson, who went by the moniker Party Store Productions. And so that was really the kickoff point for me making over 70 posters in the course of 10 years. Virginia and I worked very close together on commissions for the shows that she booked around Detroit. And I really credit her with giving me a leg up and a platform, as well as encouraging me as a woman in like a boys' world, the world of like rock and roll shows, to price my posters appropriately and to ask for what I was worth, and also to hone my strange vision and know that people enjoyed it and responded to it. So, my influences during this time, one influence I want to like really make a point to mention is right out of college, so like right between the Ann Arbor Detroit move, I was interning at MoCAD, the Museum of Contemporary Art Detroit, in their exhibitions department. And they hosted a retrospective of artwork and influences by Destroy All Monsters, which was a noise art punk collective from Detroit in the 70s and 80s or 80s period of time. And I really want to encourage folks who may not have seen the updated retrospective at Cranbrook right now on Destroy All Monsters. It's absolutely incredible. And if you enjoy anything you see here today and see that show, you'll see where some of my inspirations come from. So the thing with Destroy All Monsters that just had me, hungering to see more of their work was that it was unapologetically punk from every angle. And the exhibition there at MoCAD really spoke to me deeply and sort of cemented the fact for me that lowbrow culture is just as important as the highbrow, and that punk mentalities and art are valid and people respond to it from every background. And it also sort of uh, brought up this question to me that I've consistently been trying to answer throughout my artistic career, which is, what does it mean to be punk as an overarching mindset and how you approach your work? Not just the aesthetics, but the mindset and the practice that you're employing. So this all really affirmed my connection to B-movie imagery, poster art, bratty musicianship, the rock and roll scene. And at that time, I was really into sort of like untidy but considered compositions. And you can see I'm obviously like using source material from like the 1950s and 60s magazines I'm collecting, and sort of doing that reference but flip and subversion of Americana values and sort of that shiny, happy facade that you see in those old magazines or old advertisements, and bringing that into like my own influence here. So these earlier posters, my process really looked like spreading out my collection of old magazines, old comic books, um, spreading them out in my studio table, listening to the Bandcamp or YouTube pages of the bands that I was illustrating posters for. And you know, there always has been, even prior to the poster art period, for me, there's always been a big connection between music and illustration for me. There's both the historical connection with the poster artists who have come before me, especially in this area of the state, but also in the process of how I produce the work. So it's really important to me that the vibe and the spirit of the music and the band I was working with was reflected in the color palette, the embellishments, the hand-drawn lettering, the style, the composition, the motifs I'm, collaging in from magazines. And, even though I didn't go to an art and design school, I wasn't really provided with historical language or lexicon or ideas or rules about composition for design and graphic design. And I was really figuring out and building my own language based on what I like to look at. And so that's something I think is interesting, is that, I've come from outside the academy, and still have come to some of the same conclusions in terms of design and composition. So yeah, at this point, my process is very analog. I'm doing a lot of hand painting, hand drawing, using markers, collage, and really in the infancy of teaching myself Photoshop. So, adding a little bit of flair that way as well. But a lot of these were like quite hand done, quite analog. Um, and in that 2016 to 2017 period, really again want to credit Virginia with connecting me with some of my musical heroes. That's been one of the great joys of being connected in this scene is that Virginia would book these incredible bands and incredibly, historically important singers, musicians to play in Detroit, and it was such an honor to make posters for them. So on the left, we have one for Rocky Erickson, who's the lead in the 13th Floor Elevators, which was a psychedelic band in the 60s. He went on to have a solo career, and I wanted to, and I do this with many of my posters, is figuring out motifs that really like speak to that band or some of their lyrics or some of their musical style. So he has this wonderful album that's very, demonic and tortured and has a lot of references to like alligator people and vampires and a two-headed dog. So I found some images online of some wolves and sort of patched that together and drew from that for this Rocky Erickson poster. The one on the right is a band from Kathleen Hanna, who's more famous for Bikini Kill and La Tigra. She's an absolute hero for me as well, and was really part of championing the Riot Girl movement in the early 90s. And so, for her poster, I really wanted to include some element of the feminine that just felt like a little bit off due to the expression on the person's face and just this sort of like randomness to like, why is she eating pizza? And so I liked having that feeling of sort of like random question marks in my work, I suppose. Um, and I'm still interested here during this time in what I have come to refer to as the undivine feminine, the gross girl, like as I've described before. Here on the right, I've referenced a photo that was sort of, from one of these 1950s Americana, like Hollywood Mirror magazines, very cheerful celebrity posing for the camera. And then I've melted her face. So kind of twisting very palatable imagery, and sort of twisting the idea of like what is the feminine and what makes like a proper woman. Um, I'm also at this time very interested in hand lettering and developing my own hand lettering style, and just having a lot of fun with it. I think I've always felt a little frustrated that I've never sort of perfected some things around hand lettering, but I actually looking back on these, I like the imperfections and the unevenness. And I think that just adds to sort of like the rock and roll feel of these. Again, here, subverting ideals of femininity. We've got a lizard woman on the left. And then again on the right, sort of this idea of subverted ideas of Americana. We've got the nuclear family, we've got the car. They're sort of melting into a movie theater of people with sort of these gooey drips. So even slightly just trying to subvert some of those motifs and images. And throughout the years, I've really been experimenting with different mediums while keeping within the genre of illustration. So I have done a bit of linoleum block printing over the years. I had a lot of fun with the one on the left. This is for Thurston Moore of Sonic Youth. And so I've done some printmaking over the years and always trying to improve my technique with that, and I have a lot of fun with that as well. You'll see on the right, more interest in the femme fatale, both in terms of like empowerment and strangeness. You know, she doesn't have pupils. She's sort of being embraced by the snake. I was also in this time experimenting with gouache and ink. So really something that, for better or for worse, has always plagued me is I don't like sticking to one medium. I like playing with different ones. So for the poster on the left, I've used gouache and ink and very small brushes, and then scanned that into Photoshop and added some bright colors in the background for that. Um, so, and then on the one on the right, you know, I'm kind of doing more thick line work, adding in bright colors in Photoshop. So I'm really sort of like playing, and every poster is a little bit different. And this will become more evident in some of my drawings post-pandemic, but you know, I've always sort of leaned into establishing a mood of like desire and longing in my illustrations. So whether that's a standalone drawing or a poster, it's really in how I treat my figures or the faces. So you might see like a furrowed brow or like some dreamy eyelashes or a figure turning away from you, turning away from the viewer, and just sort of leading the viewer to create their own story there. And yeah, this theme would really follow me throughout my artistic journey quite a bit. Here's a couple more from that time period. L Club was which is still running in Southwest Detroit, was a venue that I did a lot of poster artwork for. And I would screen print. Probably about a third of my posters we would screen print. So that was really fun as well to have a sort of collaborative aspect with some print shops in town, like Essential Screen Printing and Eastern Market. And as my show posters sort of like gained recognition through the Detroit scenes, and that sort of grew, I would get commissions from Cinema Lamont, which is an indie film pop-up. They do really great curation. They're still running today. And they do film pop-ups at different bars and venues throughout the city of Detroit of independent movies, underground movies, foreign films, old B movies. And these commissions really meant a lot to me because film is something, it's one of my favorite mediums to consume. It inspires me endlessly, and I am not a filmmaker, I never will be, but seeing a really impactful film will drive me to draw or write the next day. And so it felt really like an honor to be asked to illustrate for some of my favorite films or directors when they were having, you know, little retrospectives, like for Pedro Almodovar on the right. And here I am still like just adding a little bit of subversion, a little bit of discomfort in the way I pose my figures. So I also started broadening my horizons from just doing commissions for poster art and during this time period, and started getting commissions for album art. So I would work with both local acts. This is a band that is defunct now. They were around for quite a while, called Prude Boys. So this was for a 7-inch that they put out. I did this completely in gouache, and you know, I've dove a bit more into digital drawing the last few years, but I think some of my favorite ways to initiate my practice is analog. I just feel much more connected to the artwork afterward. And then I would also do album art for more national acts. So this is a 80s like underground cult favorite called the Bush Tetras. And I did the artwork for their first album first full-length album in 12 years that came out a few years ago. So that was really kind of an honor because it doesn't matter to me whether somebody else recognizes the name of the band, but just, you know, if they mean something to me personally, it really makes the commission that much sweeter. And right before the beginning of the pandemic, so late 2019, early 2020, Jack White's record label, Third Man Records, launched a new publication called Maggot Brain. This is a nationally distributed quarterly magazine full of writing on and images on art, music, literature, and culture. The editor, Mike McGonigal, reached out to me and set up an interview with the music and culture journalist Anna Gavrilovska. And she wrote an essay about my poster work, which was accompanied by a 6-page spread of my artwork. So in the very first printed edition of Maggot Brain, I had the pleasure to take up some space in the middle of that, and it was really, I share this because it really felt like a turning point for me in terms of being confident that I had something to say with my artwork, and that what I thought of as like a slightly strange affect in terms of the mood that arises from my pieces was actually a style that really resonated with people. So this is an image of that spread. And then, yeah, we'll move into the pandemic era, our favorite era. Um, so the pandemic brought with it, as we all remember, these feelings of uncertainty and the terrifying newness of day-to-day life and what that meant in March 2020. And like so many other artists, I turned toward my art and toward drawing to mitigate these feelings of anxiety and stress and fear. Um, and I think that this theme has always been a part of my work, but as I said before, this feeling of desire for connection on the many different levels that we were lacking during the pandemic, just desire and longing, became more evident in my work, just in these quieter scenes. Again, in the way I pose figures or the looks on their faces or the accompanying text. So these are photos. These are drawings of my friend Frankie, a musician here in Detroit. And again, in terms of experimenting with different mediums, I was working with gouache, watering it down at this point in time, and sort of creating this like dreamy cosmic background over which I would draw with micron or ballpoint pen or brush pen. And again, like I said, I'm really connected to music. Music is like inextricable from my practice. And the words here come from a Mamas and the Papas song called Dedicated to the One I Love, which is one of my favorite songs. And I just wanted to sort of marry the text and the image here to sort of work together. Again, here I'm sort of, just experimenting with some abstraction in the background and some color. And using brush pen on top of that. Something I realize I haven't really talked about in this talk that I always forget about, but people remind me of, is that I have a penchant for color, like bright poppy color. That's something that I think is really recognizable in my work, and I wish I had a better grasp on why I'm attracted to such bright colors, even when sort of the subject matter might be a little more moody. I also at this time, even when I'm working with pen and black and white, I really don't stick to one particular line work style. And something I've really liked in the last few years is exploring how light plays on shiny surfaces. And I have really kind of like made up my own language for how light and dark interact with each other, how shadow interacts in my pieces. And instead of like shading in a gradient or using hatch marks to imply shadow or lack of light, I'm just making up my own language for shadow here. So really just sort of creating you know, what I want to see, and maybe perhaps breaking some rules of how you're supposed to draw, and just seeing things come to light that way. I was also in this sort of like 2020s, early 2020s era, starting to work with colored pencil, which I was really enjoying as a foil to the pen work I was doing, because it felt almost more childlike to me, more roughly hewn, a little more sketchy, but I still could get deep colors out of it. Um, and I'm still enjoying working with colored pencil today. This is another one from the 2020s era. Again, that idea of record keeping. This is a sign, the Shred Me sign. If anyone here lives in Southwest Detroit or drives by down Fort Street at any point, I think this sign is still up there at a industrial shredding facility. And there's something about it that just makes me smile. So I wanted to immortalize that. With a sort of like moody looking woman for no reason. So some of my compositions don't always make sense. I'm just sort of patching different images together in sort of a dreamlike way. And it's up to both me and the viewer to figure out why I'm including certain images together. So rewinding just a little bit to the beginning of the pandemic, March 2020, the desire for connection I was talking about grew into something that I refer to as the Quarantine Drawing Club. So I had an Instagram account at one point with quite a big following. And during those first few weeks of quarantining, uncertainty, staying inside, isolating, a lot of people were having a really hard time with that, myself included. And I decided impromptu one day to post a pretty simple artwork prompt on my Instagram. And I got maybe like 20 responses, and I decided to post all of them and did it again a couple days later, slightly different prompt, and it ballooned into getting maybe 80 responses a day. People were out of work, people were furloughed, and it really created this opportunity to funnel anxiety and stress into an activity that gave people a sense of community, even for a short amount of time, even though it was online. Um, Really, the only way community could exist at that particular period of time. And that's something that's really stuck with me since that period is cultivating and stewarding and safekeeping community, whether it is your creative community or your social community, is one of just the most important things you can do. I think it's a great way as a creative person to really come up with new ideas and also let loose and experiment and play together. I mean, as adults, we need to do that as well. So, Quarantine Drawing Club, as vaccines became more available and things opened back up, I would begin to host art brunches and collage nights and things in person. And I still do that today to sort of upkeep that feeling of artistic community. Um, in fall 2022, I was invited once more to contribute to an issue of Maggot Brain, which was the periodical from Third Man Records. This time they chose a drawing of mine for the cover art and included an 8-page spread of my sketchbook pages. And this has really been the highlight of my illustration career. Having one of my so-called weird girls grace the cover of a nationally distributed magazine is really just been such a highlight for me. And again, just sort of cementing the fact that like people like this weird cartoony art does resonate with people. So I'll show a few pages from that spread. And that was accompanied by some text I wrote. You'll see with the image on the right, I'm so connected again to the music I'm listening to while I'm drawing. So the text, the bubble lettering and the one on the right is from a Neil Young song. The text on the right side of the page is from a Mamas and the Papas song. And I just want to get back to the title of my talk and how mark making, weird poetics, and manufactured nostalgia are, this is really my ethos, like my equation that makes up my identity as an artist. The idea of overcoming the anxiety of being vulnerable in your artwork, being open and tender and strange and sometimes funny and also raw, like that's very much who I am. As I wrap up here, I'll show you just a few um, more recent images. My style and themes have really, they've changed in the last few years. I'm a little bit more drawn to still lifes, food illustration these days, some portraiture, and I'm not as wildly active with commissions as I was back pre-pandemic, but I'm still drawing to maintain a sense of that record keeping and cementing who I am through the art that I'm creating and staying in practice. Still trying to keep things slightly poetic, slightly strange, slightly off. I'm still and probably will always be inspired by those visual signifiers of mid-century print media, the bouffants from those Hollywood magazines, the like heteronormative like tropes and the different signifiers of that time period that for some reason just really stays with me and inspires me. And I just want to leave you with the thought that it is such a gift and a blessing to be a creative person. It's an outlet for expressing who we are, whether that's abstract or more pointed. And I can't wait to make more work throughout the years. And that's about it. Yeah, thank you so much for letting me share this journey with you today.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for the time, thought, care you put into your presentation, and just for sharing more about yourself and your practice with our community here at CCS and beyond. I know we have some external guests here today. We do have a little less than 5 minutes. Are there any questions or comments for Lucy that any of you here would like to make? Well, there are some lovely comments in the chat, Lucy. I will share that with those with you after this ends, and then the recording for you all will be shared out later today, as well as uploaded to our YouTube channel. So thank you so much again.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, everyone.
Bye.